Good evening, folks. Welcome to another District Digital Forum. Tonight is the question that we are responding to is what is digital church? What is digital church? And hopefully on the screen you should be able to see a slide here that not only says what is digital church, but what is church? Because before we kind of work through the nuances of what does it mean to be digital church, I feel as if it's helpful to raise the question of what is church. And so on our screen, I have taken directly from the Methodist website a little sentence about our calling and how it breaks down. And it says here, the calling of the Methodist Church is to respond to the gospel of God's love in Christ and to live out its discipleship in worship and mission. The Methodist Church looks at doing this through four key areas. Worship, the church exists to increase awareness of God's presence and to celebrate God's love. Learning and caring, the church exists to help people to grow and learn as Christians through mutual support and care. Service, the church exists to be a good neighbour to people in need and to challenge injustice. And evangelism, the church exists to make more followers of Jesus Christ. So far, if we look at this definition of church, and again, this is just a basic one from the website, it doesn't mention anything about whether you're on a computer or not, whether you're in a building or in a as an individual or not, or whether you are online on a platform or social media or otherwise. And so far, this general definition could cater for both areas. I will say, though, as Methodists and as the tradition of Methodism, we tend to meet in buildings, and we may all have some shared experience of traveling through COVID. I'm sorry for mentioning the C word, but traveling through COVID and the journey that we had been on as a church. And for some, they embraced digital church or digital expressions of church well. For some, it felt as if it was like the last resort because the buildings were closed. For others, it was a real awakening of accessibility and opportunity to meet people wherever they are in the world, to be able to share something of church, something of our faith, community, and beyond. And and so for some, even talking about digital church, for some it's about kind of, oh gosh, well we did that. We've now reverted back to our traditional ways and we've left it in the past. For others, some churches have said, well, actually, this has been part of our journey. We're heading back, but actually we want to keep that doorway open. And for others, they've kind of said, actually, we've really embraced this and we're doing this completely differently now that we've had this experience, and we're going to incorporate it completely into our Sunday mornings or whenever you have your services. And again, others, and some of you here online tonight, it may be a case of saying, actually, we're not going to go back. We're going to do things completely differently. And I think it's helpful at this point just to acknowledge the journey that we've already been on that kind of affects and influences the way that we approach digital church from the off. We are also currently in a consultation period regarding communion and how we can provide communion online in a live broadcast. It's not allowed to be filmed and saved. It has to just be presently done. And I think that's in a way of kind of holding on to the protecting communion for what it is. But that is kind of another element of our journey that we are currently as the Methodist Church in the UK or Great Britain and etc. Exploring kind of what that means digitally to hold that kind of communion in this space, in this digital presence. So, what is digital church? I should have gone on to the next slide. There we go. So, what is digital church? For some, and this is part of my conversation as a digital church enabler, that a lot of people seem to put it just in this first little box of it's a physical church, like a Sunday service or whatever service broadcasted over on Zoom. So you might have a camera at the back, or you might be using a phone, or you might be using some lavish or basic technology to broadcast it somehow into people's homes, whether that's on YouTube or in a Zoom kind of way. Then that is the very basic essence of what potentially digital church could be. And when even kind of conference was talking about digital church, that is the kind of the general terms, an idea, an understanding of what digital church is. However, digital church doesn't have to just be confined to that, even though that might be the most popular format of digital church. The second way of being digital church could be Zoom gatherings where everyone is based in their own homes. It can be a Christian community through each individual screens, like we are doing tonight, where we've just got individual places. Not one of us is in a church building leading an official service with people physically in the place, but it's just kind of we're all on a level playing field. We're all in our living rooms or in my study in this case, and we're kind of able to contribute and to kind of interact with one another if we weren't recording or being quiet and listening to me. So there is opportunity here to kind of gather as a Christian community through the channels of Zoom. Other ways of which we can be digital church is through other websites or platforms. Here I've just left a couple of examples, or 4 examples of Facebook, X, Threads, and Blue Sky, and the way that you're using kind of social media to be able to meet the people that we have things in common with. I'll reference Facebook very briefly, and I hope I've not bored people before in the past about this, but I'm one of the administrators to Methodist Online. Methodist Online is a Facebook group, which is predominantly a Methodist Facebook group that's based in the UK. And it is one that has been going on for it's just celebrated 10 years. And basically, the thing that we have in common is our faith. And we meet together through Facebook group. We have guidelines to help keep people in order, keep our conversations focused and in order and respectful. And we have regular events, and they often are weekly events. So today is a Thursday. So this morning, I kind of welcomed people into a virtual coffee morning, and it was encouraging people to share a bit about their day, to share a photo of their cuppa, their beverage, wherever they may find themselves. And it's an opportunity of being community in that space, in that digital space. Whilst we don't have a Sunday service, that was something I had explored at one point. It is still a Christian community, and therefore we question whether could that also be digital church. Not all of the remit is covered on that previous slide of learning and caring service evangelism, question mark. But actually, the group does share things, and you can share things from that Facebook group to your own profile on the Facebook page. So it could potentially be used for evangelism. We also then have another little category here of WhatsApp and Discord. I've only discovered Discord over the last couple of years. For some of you might not know what it is at all whatsoever. But WhatsApp, hopefully you know of WhatsApp. It is basically a messaging service, an online kind of a data service of texting one another, and you can have various group chats and otherwise. And you've got to walk a little bit more carefully with both Discord and WhatsApp, because this is much more of a chat room of people being able to talk to one another freely. There isn't kind of one service of one kind of dominant voice. There might be an administrator, which would be the most dominant voice, but usually this is an opportunity to gather through a chat room, to gather through chatting, texting one another. WhatsApp is very popular because you might have limited text messages on a phone, whereas WhatsApp just requires you to have a Wi-Fi connection and data. It's a very practical level. But WhatsApp and Discord groups predominantly won't be the source of digital church, but it could be an opportunity for people to gather who are like-minded. And I have used WhatsApp and Discord not just to support a broadcast and another kind of way of being digital church, but I've known churches also to use WhatsApp instead, where they're unable to put a date in the diary to make like a Lent meeting, like a book club or a Bible study. They actually use WhatsApp as this is the week's reading. Please read it before next week, and then kind of feedback, give your thoughts and feelings within the next week. And so it can kind of encourage community, but maybe in itself it might not be the be all and end all. It might not be digital church in its entirety, but it could be a supplementary ability to kind of add into kind of being digital church. So we've got those kind of four areas. Any questions so far, then speak up. But basically, those are the kind of the general areas of which we could maybe define digital church. There might be other platforms, there might be other websites and ways, but it's a way of kind of digitally gathering in that place and ticking some or all of those boxes of what it means to be church. There is something here about questioning about saying, well, actually, how effective can we be church across a digital divide? But to be honest, there can be the same question of whether that happens physically as well. Is that some people say that Zoom, we don't know what we're engaging with or how the person at home is responding. Actually, we don't necessarily know that in church either. There might be people sat in our congregation who have well and truly switched off, in figuratively speaking, of course. So there are questions that could be directed at digital church, yes, but it also could be questioned about general church as well. So we're going to move on again. And so here,
Before you do that, Mark, could
go
I
on.
just ask,
Yeah.
what's threads
Uh,
and what's the other one? Is that public?
Threads is, I'm going to go back. Thank you for asking. So X used to be what Twitter is now. Threads is the Meta Facebook equivalent of that. So from the same company as Facebook and Instagram, Threads is a mainly text-based sharing thing that looks an awful lot like X/Twitter. And Blue Sky is also an independent kind of company that also does very similar things to X. I would say that Threads tries to incorporate things from Instagram and Facebook. So you can kind of share something on Instagram and it can go both to Facebook and to Threads. And so it's very much kind of in the same umbrella category as X, but it's also programmed directly into Facebook and Instagram. Blue Sky is very much a response to X and the what's the word? The ongoing political concern over having a billionaire in overall control. Blue Sky is like open source and led from the ground up from people from users up, and so it isn't as popular, but what they're trying to do is make it completely accessible. Ironically though, they started off that you had to have a code to join because they didn't want it to build up too quickly because they just simply didn't have the people power to maintain it and to operate it. So, but Threads, Blue Sky, and X, I would kind of put in the same category, really. What I haven't put on here is also Instagram or Snapchat or even TikTok. But I feel as if those kind of things tend to be trying to find uh, an audience, trying to kind of like there are individuals putting stuff out there, and you're going to get some engagement, and you might be able to kind of get uh, some traffic, some kind of likes, and people watching your video, but it's less like it's less focused on community. It's much more about personality and people liking your video and moving on. There isn't any impetus or any direction towards becoming a community. Whereas Facebook, you can at least have a page or a group where you can draw like-minded people together in one place. Whereas I would say the same with X, Threads, and Blue Sky is that you can, it's kind of like shouting stuff into a crowded room and you just have no guarantee of who you're going to speak to, and you might get shouted at from other people, and people might comment on your thing, and you're thinking, what has that got to do with that anyway? You know, whereas at least Facebook, you can have at least a defined group where you can say, well, actually, if you're in this group, then hopefully you've got these the kind of there's gatekeeping where they can protect that community and say, well, actually, if you join here, you've got to answer these sort of questions. If you're taking part in this community, you've got to follow these guidelines. Whereas X Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, you're basically shouting into a crowded room and you just don't know what you're going to get. So you're not going to get that same, dare I say, intimacy or the same level of connection with people because they are just bombarding that room with so many videos, so many comments, so many bits and pieces that it's going to be very hard to find community. And that's where kind of Discord groups, or they technically call them Discord channels, or WhatsApp groups, could actually gather those people, and so sort of kind of provide that sort of more community space rather than it just being on one platform. I will also say that I'm talking about social media platforms here, but there might be times when actually you can find community on computer games. And so there might be people who share the same servers or you're part of the same group. So everything from you might glaze over at this point, Fortnite or PUBG, which is a shooting game. Fortnite's also a shooting game where you can be part of a bigger clan. Clash of Clans is another one, slightly dated now, but these are all places where you can have chat rooms and talk about the fights that you're involved in, and that even in those places, believe it or not, you can find community. I very much doubt they're going to be church focused, but it's not saying that they can't be. The likelihood is that they're just more generally gathering because of those computer games. I'm going to move on if that is okay. But please do ask questions if you have some. So here I've just broken down those four broad categories. And the things in orange are the things to consider. So if we're a physical church, and again, I've put Sunday in inverted commas because it's not necessarily on a Sunday, but you get the idea of that traditional church service. Um, if you're broadcasting it on Zoom or on YouTube, then you still have to make sure that your copyright license is up to date and you're getting the right streaming license, etc. There might be technology, hardware, software issues, and that is part of my role as well, having conversations with churches that they're kind of going, oh, well, we really need to upgrade this, and and I kind of can be some encouragement there. There's also a need for technical stewards, as to say, people who, maybe not capital S stewards, but people who are able to steward the devices, who are able to be technicians who can kind of press start on the Zoom, stop the Zoom, make sure that the audio is coming through. But it also may be, and it relates to this next category of safeguarding, you may also require people to be there as digital stewards, as to say, people who stand at the door or at the waiting room in Zoom and think, oh gosh, that's a strange email address or that's a strange user coming in, and they're just maybe there to vet and to make sure that the people coming in are the people that they say they are, and therefore there is this kind of, we need to be aware of who are we letting into our digital space as well as our physical space. Accessibility, there is something here about actually, are people able to hear, but actually are people able to access, like if you're putting something up on the screen in the building, are you also sharing that on the Zoom at home? There's also an element here, and especially when we have this traditional view of church where, dare I say, it's something like a songs of praise, like on a Sunday afternoon slash evening, that how are we just expecting to turn up and turn on? And this is where it kind of branches over into this blue area of what's the challenge. And there might be an expectation for people just to do that, to just turn up, turn on. Oh, I've watched it for half an hour, then I'll turn it back off again. But there is an opportunity that if you can have it as a hybrid service where you've got it plumbed correctly and it requires the right hardware and the right software and the right person to operate it, you could be asking a general question at the front of church, but ask a very similar question to those, or the same question to those on Zoom as well, and and to have it more interactive, and for those people at home to be able to speak in to the service, whether that's audibly or through text. There is a way for it to be more interactive as a service. And so I know it starts to push uh, the norm of what church is, but there can be ways of which we can push the boat out in that kind of area. And I think that is easier to do when we move to Zoom gathering where everyone is based in their own homes is that you automatically have this interaction between one another, and actually, um, you can be much more gathered in and have a good chat about things, have a good exchange about things. Um, I grew up in a rural Methodist church where, as a preacher, you could ask a question and people will shout back at you, and you'll ask maybe a rhetorical question and somebody will answer it. And so I'm quite used to having a bit of banter and bit of to and froing, even in a traditional style service. Whereas actually in a Zoom gathering where everyone's in their own homes, they could genuinely just kind of speak up, whether they've accidentally put themselves on mute or otherwise. But there is this opportunity to speak back directly into it, and it's much more acceptable space to have that kind of exchange. The drawback here, or the challenge in that space, is about cultivating a holy space. That when you are just sat in your living room or in the house, you might be easily distracted by the usual things that are happening in your house. And so it may be a way that you lead the service or lead the interaction of saying, how can we try and encourage people to make this a holy space? It might be about lighting a candle. It might be saying liturgy together that kind of covers like a prayer that talks about where we are, but focusing on God, etc. And so there are ways of which that can we can help that space be more focused on God, even though it might be the same room that they've been in for 8 hours in the day. Um, so we then move to digital gatherings via one or more platforms like Facebook, etc. Where yes, we need the technology, we need people to log into it, and we might need the digital administrators for people to oversee the group. But actually, it does, whilst you can't be sat in the same place physically, you can be able to share resources, share songs on from YouTube, prayers, devotional material. And so it is a real good way of bringing things together and bringing digital things together in that space. And and I think that is kind of quite a strength to that kind of area and that place to be digital church, to bring digital resources, and that whilst we might not physically be stood next to one another singing, we could share a song that really means, speaks to us, that actually could really help one another and help a sense of our worship. But it's not a collective thing, but it kind of is. Starts to kind of push the terminology maybe a little, it stretches it a little bit. But then there is a question of how do we interact with one another? Is it good enough just to like something, or are we expecting more exchange? And so yeah, so that ability to listen to and respond to each other is maybe more of the challenge. I am going to raise here these challenges of these more digital focus groups about actually it's one thing doing this digital church stuff, but actually it might be more challenging to relate it to how we do traditional church. That it's not going to be the five hymn sandwich and two readings, intercessory prayers, and a sermon. It could be, but it it doesn't have to be restrained by that. It doesn't have to be confined by our liturgy, our traditional way of being church, and therefore we could do something on a Sunday morning wildly different from a traditional church, and therefore it can be hard sometimes marrying these two kind of expressions of church together. And again, that goes for oversight and churchmanship of how do we facilitate and enable digital church to flourish and grow and evolve? How do we kind of help to cultivate a holy space when someone's interacting on a bus, or in the passenger seat of a car? It's how do we kind of carve out this kind of digital church space when people could be absolutely anywhere in the world? And just kind of finally talking about the WhatsApp and Discord groups, it can be a fantastic place to share resources and to chat informally, but you might not necessarily be able to kind of oversee um, a church service in a traditional way. You might not be able to kind of what's the word to help kind of curate a service from start to finish, but you might be able to kind of share resources. But again, the question is, are we then just trying to shoehorn uh, digital church into traditional church and traditional church expectations, whereas actually maybe digital church can be more freedom giving, and that actually we don't necessarily have to do everything all in the same order, all in the same way. And so I'm going to move on again to the cons, to the negatives of, well, actually when we gather digitally, we kind of have to take people on face value. We can't know for sure who they are, who they say they are, who they are. That they, if we've met them, in person, it's very easy or easier to establish who they are. Though I have met people saying that they are one person and they're in fact not. But the trust works slightly differently online. But you hope that you can kind of base it on something, or over time you get to know the real person, however they may be presenting themselves. There is also something here about commitment, about can be quick to leave, that you don't have to join a Facebook group and stick to it. You can get a bit bored and go, well, actually, I'm glazing over here. This is not my thing, and it becomes very much more of a what do we have to offer? What are we trying to sell in this digital space? Because that's what people are used to: a professional, slick model and a very professional looking front actually doesn't necessarily meet the expectations of the audience slash congregation. That being said, in the same breath, there's actually something really genuine about people, and about people putting effort into sharing resources, to sharing a homemade video of a worship resource, that people go, you know what, as long as they can hear it, as long as they can see it, actually, it can be really endearing, and it doesn't have to be polished. It doesn't have to be £100,000 budget blockbuster. There can be something really meaningful in seeing something very basically put together, which it might be our best effort. Don't get me wrong, but actually, there can be people are quite used to the big blockbuster stuff. And so if church is doing it at a much simpler level, it can be quite kind of uh, refreshing to have something in a different way. Um, Cons again, there can be a difficulty for those with digital poverty, because of course we can't all have fantastic devices. We can't all have the latest iPhone or Android phone or tablet or computer. And therefore, there may also be issues when, even if we do have that kind of kit, do we have people at home or in those places where actually can they operate this stuff? And so I have had experience of where actually we've got to get so and so online. Actually, they may have a member of the family who could do it, or they have to maybe wait the next week until somebody goes and visits from church to help set things up properly. But there are pros to this. It's not just negative things. In some ways, it's easier to sign up to digital church than a traditional one. There are less jobs to be done. There are less commitments. It's much easier to access, to communicate to one another. I mean, we live in an age where, we can communicate. We have the potential to communicate to people in their pockets at completely different ends of the world, which is amazing kind of possibility to do this sort of thing. And we have the ability to quickly share and receive information, resources, to kind of really accompany people in their journeys, whether it's to work or to the hospital or beyond. And so therefore we're not bound by geography or physical any physical restrictions or otherwise, but also it could come at a cost of being open all hours, of always being accessible, and therefore we also have to protect ourselves as well. So there's a bit of a balance there. Finally, and just to kind of drawing this to this part of the section to the end, is about the conclusion is that just like any expression of church, whether physical or digital, it requires graft. It requires people interested. It requires people to be engaged, to have time online. So if you are thinking of doing a Facebook group, then actually Are you already on Facebook? Is it something that you're comfortable with? There are people that can be very ambitious and go, oh, I'm going to start the next Facebook church for this area. And actually, if they don't use it, and if they've forgotten to log on for like 4 weeks, then you might be doing more damage than what you would if you just didn't get involved with it. Um, churches, yeah, as I've said here about COVID, with a lot of ways we've actually reverted back to traditional ways, but actually technology could play a part for our church. It could kind of enable people to see church in a different light, to physically see inside our buildings, to get a taste of our worship, and so it really could be the kind of the front window of our physical space, but also digital church could be an opportunity to be something else altogether different. And it's whether we have the energy, the resources, or the time and the commitment to put more resources and more time into this kind of space, because it could have the potential to to really be a new shape of church, but it depends on how much of the traditional church we are willing to let go. And so I think that is all for me for now. Um, there is a place for questions, but if nobody wants to ask any official questions on the record, we'll then wrap it up there. So thank you for those who have tuned in on YouTube. And my name is Mark Stennett, and I'm the Digital Church Enabler for the Yorkshire West District. Thank you.